When we think of artificial intelligence, we tend to picture pure logic, right? A world of ones and zeros that's totally objective. But what if that's just not the whole picture? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this idea, this illusion of neutrality, and ask a really critical question. If AI is built by humans, can it ever truly be unbiased? Okay, let's just dive right in with a huge real-world example. Hiring. The future of hiring? It's already here. Get this, an estimated 99% of Fortune 500 companies are now using some kind of automation in their hiring process. They've got AI writing job descriptions, sifting through mountains of resumes, and screening applicants, all for the sake of efficiency. And that's the big question, isn't it? Does just handing these incredibly important decisions over to a machine automatically get rid of all our human prejudices? Or are we just creating a high-tech smokescreen for the same old biases? To get some answers, let's look at what we can call the case of the biased bot. A major large-scale study from the University of Washington decided to put some of these cutting-edge AI hiring tools to the test. And the results? Well, let's just say they were pretty shocking. The findings here are absolutely staggering. So what the researchers did was they took actual resumes and changed nothing, except the names, to make them sound like they belong to different races and genders. The result? The AI models favored white-sounding names an incredible 85% of the time. Meanwhile, female-sounding names were favored just 11% of the time. We're not talking about a small hiccup here. This is a massive baked-in bias. And believe it or not, it gets even worse. Maybe the most jaw-dropping finding from this entire study was this. Black male-associated names were never ranked higher than white male-associated names. Not once. Zero. That points to a really severe kind of intersectional bias that the algorithm didn't just notice, it learned it and applied it ruthlessly. So how on earth does a machine become biased? How does a computer learn prejudice? To really get to the bottom of this, we need to understand the process. We have to look at how an algorithm gets its education. Well, it all starts with this one fundamental concept: training data. The best way to think about this is like an AI's personal library of textbooks. It's this enormous collection of information. We're talking millions of past hiring decisions, old resumes, performance reviews, that the algorithm studies to learn what a good candidate is supposed to look like. So it all breaks down into a pretty simple three-step process. First, the AI just consumes all this data. Second, it starts to identify patterns, who got hired in the past, who got that promotion, what words they tended to use on the resume. And third, it takes those patterns it learned and uses them to make predictions about new stuff, like that resume you just sent in. This quote from the Brookings Institution just hits the nail on the head. If the textbooks you give the AI are flawed, its education is going to be flawed. If that historical hiring data is packed with decades of human biases and societal problems, the AI isn't going to fix it. Nope, it's going to learn it as the gospel truth. And all of this builds up to a much bigger, almost philosophical question, something we can call the neutrality myth. If an AI's education comes from our messy, biased world, is it even possible for it to be truly objective? And look, this is a really complex debate. On one hand, you have people who argue that a properly designed AI could be an amazing tool to get around our own messy human biases and apply rules fairly. But on the other side, the counterargument is really powerful, that true neutrality is basically impossible, that it lets the humans who built the thing off the hook, and that pretending AI is some neutral judge is actually a pretty harmful idea. To really get why this idea of neutrality is so tricky, we have to look below the surface. A report from the National Institute of Standards and Technology gives us the absolute perfect metaphor for this: the bias iceberg. What's so brilliant about this model is that it shows us that the biases we usually talk about, the technical errors and the skewed data, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the part we can see. But lurking right there under the water are these much larger, deeper, and way more fundamental sources of bias. So that visible tip, that's what the report calls statistical or computational bias. This is the stuff we've been talking about: the data that isn't representative, technical glitches, flawed assumptions in the code. It's the most direct, most obvious part of the problem. But right below the surface, just out of sight, we find human biases. This is all about the people who build these things, the engineers, the project managers. It's about their cognitive shortcuts, their unconscious assumptions, their personal blind spots. All of that human baggage inevitably gets encoded right into the systems they create. And then, way down at the bottom, the massive hidden foundation of the entire iceberg. This is systemic bias. This is the big one. This refers to all the historical, societal, and institutional inequalities, things like racism, sexism, that are already baked into the fabric of our world. The data an AI learns from is just a snapshot of that world. So it learns our deepest societal biases not as problems, but as rules. Okay, I know. Seeing that entire iceberg laid out like that can feel pretty overwhelming, but it's not a reason to give up. In fact, understanding the full scope of the problem is the absolute first step toward finding a solution. So the question becomes, how do we actually start building fairer AI? Well, one really powerful, proactive tool is something called a bias impact statement. This is basically a checklist that forces developers to stop and ask the hard questions before they even start building. Questions like, hey, who is this actually going to affect the most? Is our data really diverse enough? And is our own team representative enough to catch the cultural blind spots we might be missing? And this kind of proactive thinking can't be a one-and-done thing. Best practices now include doing regular bias audits, kind of like you do a financial audit. It means building diverse teams, not just because it looks good, but because people with different life experiences will spot different problems. And maybe most importantly, it means actually talking to the communities that are going to be impacted by these tools. This quote really captures the goal perfectly. It's not about chasing some myth of perfect neutrality. It's about responsible design. The whole point is to consciously, deliberately build systems that don't just amplify the inequalities we already have, but instead maybe even push us toward fairer outcomes. So where does that leave us? When we see a biased AI, our first instinct is probably to say, hey, that machine is broken. But what if it's not broken at all? What if the algorithm is working perfectly? And it's just holding up a flawless mirror to the biases that are embedded in our data, in our society, and ultimately, in ourselves? The question we have to ask is a biased AI a failure of technology, or is it just a reflection of us?